Lots of countries have ambitious targets to ramp up on hydrogen power. What does it actually involve? And is it really the best solution? Let's have a look. Whatever you think about it, the world seems to be moving decisively towards low or zero carbon energy. The UK and Europe, Japan and South Korea are all committed to net zero carbon by 2050. China has committed to net zero by 2060. Even Vladimir Putin has made first tentative steps in the direction of reducing emissions. More and more countries are seeing the direction of travel and working out what they need to do to keep up. Because it's not just about whether you get the power for your society's day-to-day needs, but also about who gets to benefit from the rise in the new technologies that will become globally important. One of those technologies is hydrogen. You may have heard debates about whether electric-powered cars are better than hydrogen fuel cell-powered ones. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Various countries have concluded that it will be a key technology for the future. The EU is committed to a massive $550 billion investment in developing hydrogen power. Japan has announced its intention to become the first hydrogen society, and China's already pushing ahead with hydrogen, currently making 1/3 of the world's total. The EU and China are particularly vying for market dominance. Any major transformation of the world energy system on the scale that is currently underway is going to be full of both opportunity and risk, which is what you expect in a period of rapid change. So it's worth seeing if we can understand what it's all about. The first thing to note is that hydrogen is not an energy source in the way that fossil fuels are. Really, it's an energy carrier, a medium for energy storage. Like electricity, the energy has to be generated. Like electricity, that energy can be generated by renewables or by other non-carbon forms, or it can be generated by fossil fuels. Most of the hydrogen currently produced in the world is produced by fossil fuels, coal and natural gas. The difference between hydrogen and electricity is that hydrogen is a chemical energy carrier, molecules, not just electrons. And that's an important distinction because it explains why hydrogen may be better in some situations than electricity, and hence why so many countries are interested in investing in it. So, for instance, it can be stored and transported in a stable way over a long time frame. It can be shipped around the world. It can be burned to produce the high temperatures needed for many industrial processes, such as making steel. And it could also conceivably utilize a lot of existing energy infrastructure that was originally designed for fossil fuels. And that last one is key. It gives an immediate shortcut in getting to scale, and it potentially rescues a lot of existing infrastructure from becoming stranded assets. It puts the owners of those assets in a good position to profit from becoming champions of zero carbon energy. Unlike what the campaigners believe, you're more likely to move quickly to a net zero world if you can show incentives for the big corporations to profit by being part of a solution, which should be obvious but for some reason isn't. We'll come back to that later. At one level, hydrogen is the best fuel you could think of. For one thing, we're not going to run out of it. Hydrogen is the most abundant substance in the universe. But there's nowhere where we can just harvest it. It doesn't occur in a pure form in nature. It has to be extracted from the compounds that contain it. The problem is that none of the ways of doing this are hugely efficient. One common way of producing hydrogen comes through a process called steam reforming. This combines high-temperature steam with natural gas to extract hydrogen. It's currently the most used process to produce hydrogen in the US, but it's pretty inefficient in energy terms. Indeed, the energy you get in the form of hydrogen has less energy than simply using the natural gas that the process started with in the first place. And obviously, it produces carbon emissions, so it's not the process of the future. Another method is electrolysis, passing an electric current through water, liberating the H from H2O. The electricity for that can be provided by renewable sources. More of it is needed than is used for steam reforming. 30% of the electricity energy is lost, so the hydrogen produced this way is only 70% efficient, and that's before you've even transported and used it. There's an evolution of that method, which is known as polymer exchange membrane electrolysis. This was an attempt to improve the conductivity of a material to get higher efficiency, up to 80%, with a hope that further evolution of the technology will get that to between 82 to 86% before 2030. That, or continued improvements in state-of-the-art water electrolysis, should continue to boost efficiencies gradually. But it's never going to be a highly efficient process. In terms of comparing hydrogen to batteries as a medium for energy storage, hydrogen is always going to lose out. Battery efficiencies are up to around 99%. But of course, energy efficiency isn't the only factor. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be talking about it at all. One of the big advantages of hydrogen comes down to its power density compared to its weight. If you're looking at, for instance, fuels for air travel, electric batteries are not even remotely feasible because of the sheer weight of the batteries. In principle, hydrogen could be a better option. It carries 3 times as much energy per weight than petrol, diesel or jet fuel. But there are lots of obstacles still to be overcome and some significant disadvantages. One of them is to do with transportation and storage. As a gas and a liquid, hydrogen is very low density, so you have to increase that density. And there are 2 ways to do that. One is to compress it to around 790 times atmospheric pressure. To do that uses another 13% of the energy that it provides. The alternative is to turn it to a liquid cryogenically, which is hard to do. Hydrogen only liquefies at minus 250 degrees centigrade. That would give you an efficiency loss of 40%. So pressurization turns out to be the best option from that point of view. So in practice, transporting hydrogen would give you a 33 to 56% energy loss from the original energy source. It can be done, but it obviously makes it more expensive, which is why right now people are focusing particularly on the things that it can do that other sources can't. With the exception of automobiles, where some believe there's a battle to be had. Now, Elon Musk doesn't think so. He calls the idea of hydrogen fuel cells for cars as mind-bogglingly stupid because of their relative energy inefficiency compared to batteries. You kind of expect him to say that, since his business is bet on the other way. Japan has decided otherwise, with its target for 11 firms to build up to 80 hydrogen fueling stations for fuel cell vehicles in the next 2 years. It then expects to have 160 such stations by 2021 and 900 by 2030. One of the arguments is that using hydrogen, you could extend the range of a car without adding to the weight that you would need to do the same for a battery-powered vehicle. We all know that one of the barriers to customer acceptance for electric vehicles is the fear of them running out of charge when you're unable to get to a charging station. The range of such vehicles has been improving, but generally that comes at a cost of a heavier battery. And of course there's a trade-off between the extra charge you get and the extra energy you need to move the extra weight of the battery. Hydrogen has a specific energy of 40,000 watt-hours per kilogram. Lithium-ion batteries have a specific energy at best of 278 watt-hours per kilogram. In practice, mostly it falls down to 157 watt-hours per kilogram. I say again, 40,000 versus 157. That stat is obviously stark for the air industry and a factor in the debate around the future of ground vehicles. But cost is the ultimate factor, because if cars are going to become mass market, which they need to do to support the charging infrastructure you need, then it has to add up for the standard customer. Fully charging a Tesla Model 3 costs around $10 to $12, giving a range of 500 kilometers. That comes out at between 2 and 2.4 cents per kilometer. Charging a current hydrogen vehicle, the Toyota Mirai, costs $85 for a similar range at 480 kilometres. That comes out at 17.7 cents per kilometre, which is a pretty big gap in operating costs. You might also be put off by the fact that there have been false starts for hydrogen in the past. From the early 1970s, when there were the first oil price shocks and petroleum shortages, the International Journal of Hydrogen Energy was launched in 1976, but interest waned as oil prices went back down. In the 1990s, there was a wave of interest pushed by climate change concerns, but again, the ongoing cheap prices for oil meant that interest in investment in new technologies for it remained too low. If you're the kind of person who thinks that if something failed in the past, it must clearly fail in the future, then you wouldn't go near this for sure. Most entrepreneurs don't think that way, and with good reason. There's a long history of technologies that failed on the first attempt because they were ahead of their time or because they weren't effectively marketed, which then turned into major successes once another company saw the potential and executed it better. Google wasn't the first search engine. Amazon wasn't the first online store. Yes, as they say, the early bird catches the worm, but entrepreneurs know that it's the second mouse that gets the cheese. And there's a strong argument to be made that the time has come for hydrogen in an expanded range of uses simply because of how the global willpower to respond to the challenge of climate change has now started turning into serious budgetary commitments. And traditional fossil fuel interests have moved a lot further in seeing their need now to adapt their business models to the new business realities. Now, that doesn't guarantee success. Governments have a mixed track record at best in picking industry trends and investing in them. But it is an important change of context. So, for instance, the EU hydrogen strategy, some of which comes as part of its €1 trillion Green Deal programme, some of which will come from member states and the private sector, the EU plan commits to a major expansion in green hydrogen, hydrogen produced by zero carbon energy sources. Part of this focuses on an increase in electrolyser capacity. It'll go from the current 600 megawatts capacity today to 6 gigawatts by 2024 and 40 gigawatts by 2030 at a cost of up to €42 billion. To feed that capacity, there needs to be up to €340 billion spent on 120 gigawatts of new solar and wind generation. €11 billion will go into retrofitting existing hydrogen plants that are fueled by natural gas, blue hydrogen, with carbon capture and storage. And then there will be €65 billion going into hydrogen transport and storage infrastructure. One of the reasons why some of the fans of solar and wind power like hydrogen is that it solves one side of the problem with the variability of those energy sources. When the wind is blowing and the sun is shining and the energy is already at capacity in the grid, then you either need to store that surplus energy or else simply allow it to go to waste because you can't immediately use it. If instead it can be used to generate hydrogen, then you're at least converting that energy into a useful form that can be distributed. And that's true. But if you're going to build a significant role for hydrogen across industry and heavy goods vehicle uses and all sorts, you can't make it economic to purely run on that surplus energy alone, even if that energy was completely free, simply because it wouldn't be a dependable and reliable source. So hydrogen producers will, for sure, happily take advantage of any free energy, but will have to supplement it with zero carbon energy bought at wholesale prices the rest of the time. And they can focus for this on the places in the world where production is most reliable and hence the lowest cost. If you can economically move hydrogen around, then you might as well produce it in the parts of the world where solar energy is most abundant and reliable, but where few people actually live who want to directly consume that energy. Some, like the oil giant nations like Saudi Arabia, may well become the solar energy giants of the future for that reason. It shouldn't surprise you, therefore, to learn that Saudi Arabia has announced a $5 billion project to turn renewable energy into hydrogen. They did so because of the momentum of growing hydrogen production worldwide, and the expectation that is now going to accelerate fast. You might have noticed that there was a joker in the pack with the EU plan, which is that it has a commitment to green hydrogen produced from renewables, but it also had an acknowledgement in there that blue hydrogen, that from natural gas, is going to remain a factor for the time being, hence the investment in carbon capture. There are a couple of reasons why that's seen as controversial in the context of a move to net zero carbon energy. The first is that with existing technology, only 90% of the CO2 can be captured at any kind of economic cost. Future innovation may be able to bring that down, but that's speculation right now. The second is that there are always some leakages of natural gas to the atmosphere. Fugitive emissions. Methane is a powerful, albeit less long-lived, greenhouse gas. Again, that's a problem you could probably solve. Satellite technology for tracking leaks is improving all the time, but it remains an argument in the to and fro of the debate. The other thing about blue hydrogen, some will see this as a plus, and as I mentioned earlier, the activists will tend to see it as a minus, is that it will give a role, and a profitable one, for some of the world's current fossil fuel giant companies. I say it again, that is almost certainly a good thing, because the more you can give incentives to the existing beneficiaries of the status quo, then the more allies you have in creating change and the fewer points of resistance you have. The activists, of course, simply demonise those companies, and regardless of their rhetoric about how urgent all of this is, they won't compromise one iota in wanting it to come at the expense of the people they don't like, which is a tell for why you shouldn't take them seriously as change agents. Using existing infrastructure is also a factor when it comes to Russia. Russia is a powerful petrostate and should be expected to lose out big time to the move away from fossil fuels. It's the leading supplier of natural gas to Europe and an increasingly important supplier to China. In the short term, though, even with the scenario focused on meeting climate goals, the International Energy Agency expects Russia to do well. Natural gas demand in Asia will go up over the next 2 decades. It will fall in Europe, but since Russia is the lowest cost supplier, as overall consumption goes down, Russia's share of the market will go up. But then in the longer term, it would take those advances in carbon capture technology to enable natural gas to have a role in the low carbon economy in relation to hydrogen production. Bear in mind as well how big a factor access to energy resources has been in the bigger world of geopolitics through history. A period of rapid change towards a low carbon economy with hydrogen playing its part is also going to bring its risks. A growing seaborne trade in hydrogen would inevitably mean an increase in risks of disruption, similar to those seen on oil transit routes. It's also the case that you increasingly need a smart electric grid to utilise these different forms of energy and manage the variability that some will introduce. Such smart grids will be more vulnerable to cybersecurity risks. Russia has already been identified by the FBI as making hacking attacks on the US energy grid. So here's my summary of the current state of play. Hydrogen seems poised to become an important part of the zero carbon energy mix because it has a number of advantages. However, there are obstacles and there are disadvantages. Advantages: it's versatile based on a chemical element that's abundant, and it can help renewables that are receiving significant existing investment to make an even larger contribution. Disadvantages: more costly at the moment. The need for infrastructure to be in place to make it possible to store and transport it is slow in coming and creates a bottleneck. Right now, it's produced predominantly by fossil fuels, and we didn't touch on this particularly, but there's various bits of regulation and bureaucracy that would slow things down in the short term as well. The IEA identified a number of near-term opportunities to boost hydrogen on the way to its wider use. First, focus on the existing plants and infrastructure that can be moved from fossil fuels to hydrogen. That could service existing industries such as shipping and steel production. Second, expand the use of hydrogen in transport via fleets and freight, which brings a certain scale very quickly. And third, establish the shipping routes. And international trade in hydrogen needs to start up so it can begin to impact on global energy systems. So are these different countries right to be piling into hydrogen at the large scale they are and with the high cost that they are? Should all the others be doing the same? Let's not assume there are foregone conclusions here. You can decide to sit on your hands and simply defend the status quo. We have lots of examples we can point out where that was a bad thing to do. Countries or corporations that lost out because they didn't see which way the wind was blowing. People ignore that that's a story best told with the benefits of hindsight. Because the truth is that's not always how the story goes. For every dinosaur that failed because it resisted change, there's also those that rushed in without due care and attention into the new technologies and also failed, either because they were too far ahead of their time or they simply made the wrong bet. Not every new thing is the way of the future. Not every old thing is outdated. I remember in the euphoria of the early days of the internet, people were talking about how the internet changed everything. And the old bricks and mortar businesses like the Walmarts and all of those were going to lose out because Amazon had proved that the important businesses of the future would all be pure internet businesses. The only hope bricks and mortar businesses had was to radically reinvent themselves and be the first of their party. Otherwise, they were doomed. Well, a number of bricks and mortar businesses led by cooler heads said, let's see how this rolls out before we dive heavily into it. And once the state of the art started to settle down and many of those would-be pioneers discovered that they weren't the geniuses they thought they were, then they thoughtfully put in place their own internet platforms and supported their own pretty solid existing business models by doing so. Walmart and the others remain well placed in their industry. Were they wise or were they lucky? Inasmuch as they were the former, it's probably because they kept their eye on the long game and evaluated the fundamental business logic of the models that were put in front of them. They sorted the sound fundamentals from the hubris. New disruptive models only disrupt if they present a proposition that has a better logic than the old ones. In the UK in the last week, National Grid had to put out a number of alerts due to reduced power supply compared to demand. The lights didn't go out, but they were a lot closer to being unable to meet demand than they would normally allow. One of the factors in that was that there was reduced wind, leading to a lower contribution from wind turbines. And the critics, of course, jumped on that with glee. But it was just one factor of a number. Others were other turbines, nuclear and fossil fuel, being offline for maintenance. It nevertheless highlights the hubris of those who dismiss with a wave of the hand any practical consideration in relation to overloading a grid with too much variable power. Wiser heads look at the full range of objectives, including stability and performance, and evaluate different sources accordingly. It does seem on that basis that there's an important role for hydrogen in the mix of energy sources. It also seems likely that the obstacles will rise above its own hubris and its role will remain just one element with a specialised function to fill. No less important for all that, and almost certainly one of the key technologies of the future.